fusing architecture, storytelling, and technology. This is Fusion, the Electrosonic podcast, breaking down the art of engineering and creating lasting experiences through Pro AV. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Fusion, the Electrosonic podcast. I'm your host Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. James Bond, the KGB, the Rosenbergs, Austin Powers, Edward Snowden. Mythical or tangible spies have integrated themselves into our national and international psyche as people of extreme skill, equipped with tools of the future, and the responsibility of finding information of extreme importance. Sometimes they're praised, other times they're punished. But regardless, the spy is to be honored, and what better way to honor the spy than through their own museum? Sporting a deep red neon facade in the heart of Washington, D.C., the International Spy Museum aims to, quote, lift the veil of secrecy on the hidden world of intelligence and espionage, end quote. Today we're going to better understand the conception process behind the technical and the creative aspects of the International Spy Museum. I'd like to welcome Chris Cooper, project manager at Electrosonic and project manager for this specific museum, part of the team that brought this museum to life. Chris, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate being on here.
So, Chris, let's keep it light first. Let's talk spies for a little bit. Do you have a favorite depiction of a spy, real or fictional? Does any stand out to you as Chris Cooper, the person?
Yeah, I would have to say, as far as fictional goes, James Bond 007 would have to be it. It's a clear winner.
Hard to beat him.
Clear winner for me. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, the first spy character that I identified with really, I think, would be Roger Moore's depiction of 007. And as far as real life, from a young age, I've always been intrigued with the ninja of feudal Japan.
Ooh, I like that. Kind of a more, a more rustic medieval interpretation of the spy.
Absolutely.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's always funny talking to people about James Bond. Everyone has a James Bond that they resonate with. For me, I think... at least I grew up with Pierce Brosnan as James Bond, but I'm definitely a bigger fan of Daniel Craig in the fresh movies. Really think he's elevated the James Bond presence.
Yeah, I have to agree. I was a little leery of a blonde-headed James Bond, but as it turns out, it worked out really well.
Yeah, he crushed it. All right, so clearly you're a fan of spies. I'm a fan of spies. The concept of being in espionage, I think, has persisted for generations. What do you think it is about the spy that captures so many people's imaginations, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, there's a quote by an American author, Kurt, actually, I don't know he's an American author, but Kurt Vonnegut, that goes something like, espionage offers each spy an opportunity in a way he or she finds irresistible. I think that also speaks to the way that people perceive spies. I think we all kind of, at some point in our life, wonder what it would be like to be someone else or, live a life of danger, something like that. So I kind of think that's it. It's, it's imagining, what it would be like to be someone else.
Yeah, and I think there's an intrigue, too, to the information gathering, the secrecy, and the high-tech gadgets, too, at least from the kind of mythical, fictional perspective we often get of
And
spies.
the cars. You can't leave out the cars.
And the cars. Cannot leave out the machine gun-mounted cars with all the toys and tricks. I love them. So when Electrosonic was first approached about this project, about the International Spy Museum, what were the initial big picture ideas, and what was the client really wanting to convey or accomplish with this one-of-a-kind spy-honoring museum?
Well, I think initially it's just to educate the public about espionage and intelligence in a really engaging way. I think we were, and like you had mentioned before, I was the project manager for this, but typically when these projects in their infancy come to a company like us, it happens not necessarily when I'm involved, but sometimes a year or more in advance. I think in this particular case, it was in early 2017, I believe. Um, yeah, initially we were brought in by one of our partners, Maltby, which Maltby Cubic. They were an exhibit fabricator that we work with in the museum world quite often. Um, Early on, there had been an AV consultant who had tried to design the infrastructure into the building, but the exhibit design was extremely vague at the time. I mean, in some ways, we were well into the installation of this museum before all of that stuff was finalized. Our first task was to try to rationalize like the power and data runs for a space. Still with a very vague exhibit layout. In a case like this, our meaning Electrosonic, our experience really helped out in this situation. We ended up doing another pass later on once the exhibit design was further along. But yeah, yeah, that was a challenge. We also had to give a budget early on without much of an exhibit design.
And see, that's tough, right? I mean, giving pricing and trying to figure out what is this whole project going to cost before you actually get into the intricacies of each and every single exhibit, especially since, it's such a large scale and interactive exhibit. How do you as a project manager balance those kinds of lines, really? Both the budgetary and also the technical side, and trying to present something that feels not only realistic, but also doesn't cut yourself too short and, maybe undersell some of the vision of what the client wants.
Honestly, I would like to take a lot of credit for that, but a lot of this falls on the salesperson. And in this particular instance, I definitely like to give a shout out to Andrew Kidd. He was the one that started this project in its infancy. He's since retired. He retired at the end of last year. So the Spy Museum was actually his baby, and that was his last job with Electrosonic. So a lot of the credit goes to the fact that at least with Electrosonic, that the sales person or sales team follows, they just don't hand it off to our operations team and then leave the picture. So I mean, I really have to give the credit to Andrew Kidd and our sales force for being able to do a lot of that balancing act and juggling. And having talked to Andrew about the challenges that we faced here, he had said to me, kind of in jest, that he was surprised that, given the fact that the exhibit layout was pretty vague when we had to provide a lot of this stuff, that he got about 90% of it right. So kudos to him.
And then just to kind of clarify Electrosonic's position uh, in the conception of this project, obviously you were there to consult and to provide the technical and the creative expertise to make this a reality. Did Electrosonic also participate at all in some of the narrative conversations, or at least were they in the room for them and trying to help guide how the technology might tell those required stories that the clients were imagining?
To an extent, and we also have to understand on this particular museum that it was an existing, or has been an existing museum in the DC area since 2002, I believe. So a lot of this stuff had already been figured out, and those guys are wonderful. But they engaged, and I guess to just go back to your question is, yes, we were to some extent, but a lot of that stuff fell on the shoulders of uh, Gallagher Museum Services. As far as working with the spy team and the owner Milton Maltz, to try to hash out what those would be. But of course, we were in the project pretty early, and available for consultation, of course.
So yeah, of course, the museum has been around for a while now. This was really more of a facelift, upgrade, and an expansion of the existing museum. Getting it a renovated and unique original space. But I think during that process, there were obviously some new exhibits that were brought into the fray. And I think that brings up an interesting conversation in how to approach the content for something like international espionage, right? So I was just wondering, was there any sort of tonal concern at all on the creative side? I know Electrosonic wasn't the one necessarily guiding the narrative, but being involved in the process, were there any tonal concerns on that creative side, deciding which stories to tell and which to avoid? And not necessarily for like security or national security reasons or anything, but just for framing how people go into viewing espionage from a national and international perspective.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the museum's focus is on, like the truth of the matter and the ways espionage was used to help further and or hinder, any particular event. But yeah, there was a major concern with not picking any sides in any story or creating a narrative that was or they wanted to rather create a narrative that was neutral.
So how did the museum operators approach the distinct, controversies around the politics they were telling? When I think even just the most recent spy stories like Snowden's, for example, the political class can still be very antagonistic to those actions. So an exhibit around him or his contemporaries could be seen as uncouth. How did they approach trying to tell these stories in a way that felt unbiased or neutral?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had a similar question when I started on the project as well. Like similar questions that I would have had when I was working on the Museum of the Bible was how they were going to handle, some of these topics, and then and I had some conversations with some of the museum staff about that, and according to them, they attempted to get as many firsthand accounts of the story as possible, as well as going to intelligence sources for information. Most of the board members for SPY, I believe, are made up of ex-CIA, FBI, and NSA people. So, they were pretty well versed on topics in the museum. Yeah, also, I mean, in addition to that, Chris Costa is the executive director of the museum, and as part of the intelligence community and previously working with the White House, was knowledgeable about such things as well.
What was the community reception like as this was being put together? Was it generating buzz that the International Spy Museum was going to get this structural facelift?
Yeah, I mean the people were very interested to see what the museum would display, especially the largest donor at the museum, Keith Milton. He has one of the, if not the largest collections of spy artifacts, maybe in the world. And a lot of those artifacts were donated, by people that actually use them, which is super cool. But just the fact that like you were mentioning, the building itself, just the fact that the new building, which could be seen from the highway, as it was going up, like you had mentioned, the large red structures, kind of protruding out, toward the freeway, was such a work of art. That alone created a buzz. The Like we had mentioned before, the Spy Museum had been in DC since 2002, so people knew what a special place it was already. But the fact that they were expanding into, I believe it was like a 32,000 square foot space, that would include event space, I think on the seventh and eighth floor, and would also have a rooftop terrace, that didn't hurt. So, just to go back to the question, heck yeah, there was a buzz.
All right, I want to get into some of the technical and storytelling specifics that Electrosonic helped put together and helped bring into reality. So let's break those down. Since the mythos of the spy is often linked with awesome tech, you mentioned it yourself. Gotta have the super duper cars. I'm talking the shoe phone, some of the fun hidden pistols in
Oh yeah.
little cameras and lipsticks. I mean, the imagination runs amok when you start thinking about spy tech. So I'm sure the exhibits wanted to reflect that to a degree. So what were some of the ways that Electrosonic tried to blend mythical or real spy tech with this interactive exhibit technology that you were trying to bring to the table?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Daniel. That's a good question. You're right about the blending of the technology into the space. Not just for the Spy Museum, but for museums in general. We try to make sure that the technology serves the purpose of telling the story, which in a lot of cases means that we need to make sure that the tech is hidden as best that we can. Specifically related to Spy, there were areas such as on the fourth floor there's a mailbox simulating a bomb. So it's using subwoofers and none of this stuff that you could see, but you walk up, like you're just going to get a letter out, and then it's such a shocking, a shocking thing to feel the thud and you know the just that that subwoofer just moving so much air. Again on that floor, there's a check exhibit called Checkpoint Guard Dog that uses proximity sensors. Now we use proximity sensors all over the museum, but this particular sensor, hidden from the public view. But a lot of people wouldn't know why this dog. Like how does this very big German Shepherd and German guard in a guard shack know to be talking or barking at you? So that's another thing. There's a part of the museum called Sneak into Berlin that uses low light camera hidden in a secret spot. Then, based on your the RFID that you pick up when you enter the museum, and that gives you your code name that follows you through the space. You see that picture that was recorded as you were sneaking in on an exhibit, further down the line. So you're wondering is like, holy cow, that's me. When did that happen? I don't realize when that happened.
And I feel like that's the mark of a truly great exhibit, right? Is when the technology, to a degree, is in your face, because this is the I think, exception to the rule where you want the technology visible to a degree, because that's what makes it exciting, is that it's an international spy museum. But being able to blend what is up in your face with also what needs to be hidden and what needs to be on the back end only, that doesn't interfere with the overall experience. And finding that blend specifically for this kind of museum, I'm sure, was a unique challenge.
Yeah, it was for sure. I mean, all of these museums have their unique challenges, but this one definitely had as well.
Yeah. So how did this vision for the project stack up to some of the other large-scale projects that you have personally managed, like the Museum of the Bible or the Newseum? Speak to that creatively or technically.
Yeah, I'd like to start by just saying that this is one of the things that I love not only about the industry that I've chosen to make my career in, but working for Electrosonic as well. I've been in the industry for 22 years, and with Electrosonic just over 12 years. And the thing that draws me to the industry are projects like the Spy Museum. So the way that Spy stacks up to some of the ones like Museum of the Bible. I did work in a different capacity on the Newseum, which unfortunately is no longer there in the DC area. I think they're going to move and hopefully reinvent themselves. But projects with Kennedy Space Center and NASA is that it's all about telling a story, and Spy was no different. What a great story to tell. And I think Electrosonic does a great job at helping clients, tell this story, keeping people interested. Um, yeah, yeah, without question, Spy is one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on.
So back to those storytelling points and crafting the right kind of exhibit. I know that beyond just creating fun exhibits and something that reflected the nature of the tech and the history and the intrigue of being a spy, the clients you were working with really wanted this experience to feel like a game as much as it felt like a museum. So why do you think they placed that emphasis on the narrative for the customer journey, and what kind of an impact did it have once people started visiting?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would start by saying that the entire experience is wonderful. Um, the fact that they're, the most successful paid admission museum in DC says a lot, I think. So I think it's important to the museum that patrons feel like they got their money's worth, and that it was memorable. And I definitely believe that it is. Plus, you want that word of mouth. You want people leaving that experience telling their friends. It's like, you have got to check out the new spy museum. And the whole game aspect of it helps with that, and it helps with a residual effect of people that are local to DC wanting to come back, because there's numerous different experiences that you can get because of that RFID experience in the game scenario that you had mentioned. um, using the combination of RFID and interactives, they gave you a sense of purpose throughout the exhibit. Stark RFID was the RFID company that we worked with, and we've worked on other jobs with them, but they did a superb job. As did Gallagher Media, Cortina, and the Spy Team. Those were the three content providers for the museum, and they worked with all of those guys to just make it seamless. I got a chance to do it, having been there for so long, and seeing it get the hiccups worked out, and the end result really is something special, and I think something that Spy Museum is proud of. It was amazing how well that all worked.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that y'all rolled out some creative technical solutions to make that game-like story journey completely seamless. Give me some insight on how y'all achieved that, and what some of the technical hurdles were that you had to jump over.
Well, technical hurdles definitely would have been, placement of RFID antennas. You need to, this is something that took some hashing out. A lot of trial and error. But with RFIDs, for it to be seamless, as you say, those RFIDs have to pick up the antennas have to pick up the RFID cards that each one of the patrons has gotten. It has to pick up where, it in its sweet spot, if you will. Some things, you have to tap them, where it tells you to tap them, or it's not going to pick up. Some things, you know, pick up, and you don't even know it's picking up your RFID. Like at the point that I had mentioned before with the area um, called Sneak into Berlin, or in that part of the museum. The fact that you have your RFID on a lanyard hanging around your neck was picked up unbeknownst to the patron, but it would have never taken that photo that you're going to see on a security camera. When you're at another stage of the game, let's say, that gag wouldn't work had that not kind of caught you by surprise. And that's part of the element of that particular exhibit, is when you're looking in at a security camera, like a CCTV. If you can imagine, like a security desk almost anywhere, where they're watching everything that's going on black and white monitors all over the space. I mean, that kind of takes you back and makes you think when you walk into this space and you're looking around, and because of that RFID, it knew rather exactly when to take that snapshot, and exactly when later on that you are in a place to view a picture of yourself not looking at a camera. And, it's stuff like that that really makes you think about, the way that surveillance is today. I mean, you really, with facial recognition, all of this stuff, there's really very little places, or there are very little places that you can be these days without being filmed. So, that's just one example of how they made it seamless and how, we help to do that.
And Chris, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you for your personal opinion here on the exhibits at the museum. Which turned out to be your favorite ones and why?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like the subject matter, and
Yeah.
would probably have to pick my favorites per floor if that would be okay. Um, Obviously, on the first floor, if anybody's been to the museum, that's where you see the vintage Aston Martin. We had mentioned cars before. They actually have one of the vintage Aston Martins that was used, I believe, in Goldfinger with Sean Connery in 1964. So,
A
yeah,
classic.
so that thing's got all the bells and whistles you'd expect from a Bond car, and we I forget how much. I heard at one time how much they spent on that vehicle, and it was staggering. I can't remember the exact number, but so that thing goes through a show on the first floor. Right when you walk into the museum space and you get your RFID, pay your admission. But there's a show that runs that shows the headlights dropping and the machine guns popping out, and just all of the things that car does. So on the first floor, hands down, that's my favorite there. From there, once you get your RFID, you take the elevator to the fifth floor, where you register your RFID and you get your code name, and then you enter the briefing theater. So this is really the briefing theater. This is one thing that I really like about working on museums, is a lot of these spaces have really nice theaters that kind of set the tone for the rest of your experience. And I always appreciate this as part of the journey. And theaters, that's something that Electrosonic does really well. So I've always got to give a shout out to things like that. But other things that I really liked on the fifth floor were some of the stories being told. I really like history, so for example, there was a story of James Armistead Lafayette, who was an enslaved African American serving the Continental Army during the American Revolution. Um, yeah, and he was somewhat of a double agent, and actually played a role in exposing the treason of Benedict Arnold. So, from a history standpoint, I love stuff like that, and that was on the fifth floor. Technology wise, on the fifth floor would definitely be the exhibit called Red Teaming, which deals with the activities leading up to and including the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound. I'd say that this is probably a crowd favorite too. Partially because of the projection mapping done on a scale model of the compound that kind of shows an aerial view, if you will, of what actually took place with the Black Hawk, I believe, helicopters, one of which crashed on the compound. So to be able to have an interactive that also allows you to see something like that, I think anybody would probably think that was cool. Um, Moving down to the fourth floor, which is the natural progression. Um, I have favorites both, of historical significance, as well as on the technology side. Um, on the history side of things, for me, it would be History in the Balance. That was the name of the exhibit. But this is an exhibit that is coming out of another theater called the Why Spy Theater, and speaks to our first U.S. spy master, who was George Washington. Yeah, this is really cool for me. Yeah, the really cool thing is that that they have the original letter um, written by George Washington in, I believe it was 1777. um, to Nathaniel Sackett, basically setting up the first U.S. spy network, which is called the Culper Ring. Um, and then, this actually gets me more jazzed up than the Aston Martin, believe it or not. I mean, to just think that they have that actual letter that plays such a piece of our, or such a major role in our U.S. history. And as for the technology side of things, um, on that floor, fourth floor, it would definitely be the Cyber Infinity Room, which deals with cybersecurity, or the cybersecurity threat, if you will. This room uses, from a technology side, this room uses 3 projectors in what essentially a mirrored room. So, the whole feel is very disorienting, as intended. It makes me feel pretty much the way that I do when I think about being hacked, which is powerless, you know. So definitely that served its purpose there, and I think those are probably my favorite exhibits that we worked on there. But there's so many.
All right, to kind of wrap up the conversation here, Chris, what kind of relationship have you been able to build out of this project with the client to continue to upgrade, maintain, and consult on the project even after its completion? Because I think that is a crucial point for longevity in the AV industry, that companies like Electrosonic, these creative integrators, go beyond just doing the project and disappearing, right? Cashing the check and then calling it quits. It really is building that relationship with the client and continuing to be there not only for technical services, but also for creative input and, being the go-to for either future projects or renovations on existing projects. So, yeah, how did you cultivate a relationship with this client beyond just the International Spy Museum once it was done?
Yeah, well, yeah. Thanks for that question. Yeah, we've definitely continued to have a great relationship with Spy, since its opening on May 12th of this year. Um, I mean, a lot of that is you just stay in contact with them. I mean, I was in contact with those guys often. Keep them informed of things good and bad. Honesty. Is huge. When we see things, early in the project that we see, it may be from other trades. It could be on us. Just if you just keep them informed as to what's going on, good or bad, anything that could cause a delay, anything that definitely could cause them to have to pay more money, or impact the budget one way or another. That's one thing that I really like about Electrosonic is that I think that we approach projects and clients with a lot of integrity and honesty. You know, we definitely exude. I mean, I feel like I do, and my coworkers do. We exude passion for what we do, which that's infectious. And a client picks up on stuff like that. It's like it feels a little bit more personal. You know, when they feel like you really dig what they're doing, what they're trying to convey. And, just to go back to something that I said about enjoying our industry, I've been very, very fortunate to be able to work with a lot of clients like Spy and in projects that I really enjoy the subject matter. And, all of these things help to forge those relationships. So, to just kind of get back to your question is like, yeah, we've definitely continued to foster that relationship with Spy. We're working on some things, um, you know, for them, new experiences in the museum, changing some of the experiences that kind of after they had opened. You have a lot of public opinion that sometimes can shift the way that you need to tell that story. So yeah, we're definitely engaged with them on a continual basis. And yeah, I would also be remiss to not mention the fact that that we also have an on-site technician that is basically it's an Electrosonic employee, but is there at Spy full time, Kamal Washington, and he does a great job at at continuing to foster that relationship.
And based on what you've learned with this project, both from the management to the technical rollouts to the creative storytelling, what are some of the major takeaways for your future projects that you really learned from working on the International Spy Museum? Getting that unique blend of responsibilities and creative deliverables.
Yeah, well, actually, I pretty much, we just touched on it when we were talking about relationships, and it's just that it's all about relationships. It really boils down to that. There's speaking of James Bond, just to kind of get back to that, there's a quote by Ian Fleming that says, there's only one recipe for the bestseller or for a bestseller, and it's a very simple one. You have to get the reader to turn over the page. And, in a way, I think that's what Electrosonic helps our clients, and their patrons do, which is keeping them interested. So, the biggest takeaway, I definitely have to say it's just, it's important to just keep those relationships, be honest. These are things that not only with Spy, but on other big, high profile projects that led to our success was just being ethical, being honest, and just delivering on what we promised. And personally, I can't remember a project that I've ever been involved with, through Electrosonic that hasn't been the case, and that the end result, even though we may have had lots of hurdles and project delays and lots of curveballs thrown at us, ended up being something that not only we could be proud of, but the client felt like they had good value in what we did, and then it always ends up being a success, even if it's painful.
All right, we've been chatting with Chris Cooper. He is a project manager at Electrosonic, helped lead the creative and technical charge for the International Spy Museum. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Fusion. It was a pleasure getting to break down this project with you, getting your thoughts on what makes spies so cool. We definitely couldn't step away from this podcast without talking about cool spies. I'm going to go get myself a spy car after this, but I probably got to keep saving some money before I can lock that in.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's really been a pleasure. It's been fun.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Fusion, an Electrosonic podcast. And if you like what you heard and want to listen to previous episodes or consume some more of our written or visual content, you can head to resources.electrosonic.com. Again, resources.electrosonic.com. You can also find our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and make sure you leave a rating and a comment wherever you listen to your podcast content. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. Till next time.